can use all the seats we can get. So thank you all for coming. My name is Kimberly Henriksen, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Center for Contemporary Printmaking. We're here for an artist talk today in conjunction with the exhibition that you see all around you. This is our Collaboration 2020 Encore exhibition featuring the work of Ann Chernow.
And Jim Reed.
As printed by James Reed. Yes. So the reason the exhibition is called Collaboration 2020 Encore, this relates to the original date that the show was supposed to open. The show was supposed to open March 29th of 2020. And it didn't. Well, surprise. 2020 happened, and it was a very different sort of year for everyone. And so this exhibition is a 5-year project that Anne and Jim had worked on together. And it was a really interesting and intellectually curious investigation of lithography. And I wanted to make sure that it was seen. And while we did have this up on the walls during the early days of COVID, obviously nobody came to see it. And I don't blame anyone for that. It's probably the best thing for everyone. But it's such an interesting and unusual project. It was well worth hanging and making sure that people could come and that Anne and her work could be recognized and that we could hear from her and have a talk like this today. So I thank you all for coming. And when we wrap up the talk, please do take some time to walk around and see the prints that are on view in here, as well as in the lithography studio gallery adjacent. But moving on from me, we're going to have a couple of minutes to Chris Short, who is our master printer here at CCP. Much of the project is lithography, stone lithography, and it's a difficult and complicated process that Anne has been working with for many years. And Chris actually has a litho stone and is going to give us some background and explanation of what lithography is and how it works. So,
hello everybody.
Hello.
So this is not a stone that Anne used, but this is a traditional lithography stone, a very small one. It is limestone. This is actually the back of it. You can see how nice and thick it is. Ever since Sennefelder developed lithography on the stone, turned out the stone was in his backyard that he invented lithography on. This has been, it was an industry standard for about maybe 100, 120 years, and then progress left lithography behind until all of these amazing artists that are still working today continued the process. So this is an image actually drawn by an old staff member here, Opal Derubo, portrait of his mother. The way that it works is the stone is cleaned to make it completely grease-free. Then the artist draws on the stone or paints on the stone with a greasy material called touche or a litho crayon. This is mostly litho crayon. Once the drawing is executed, it's then chemically etched so that the stone has a chemical sensitization where when water is applied to the stone, some areas are hydrophilic, meaning they absorb the water, and others are hydrophobic, meaning they reject the water. Where the drawing is would become hydrophobic. So when you sponge it with water and then roll it with a black ink, the ink will only stick to the areas where the artist had drawn. It is a magical process because at some point you clean off the original drawing and the stone looks like there is nothing on it. Until you wet it and roll it up and then suddenly the image appears. Once it's well stabilized, you can get thousands of impressions from a single stone. When you're finished with an image, it can be regrained and the stone can be used again. So they have a long shelf life, literally. So that's the basis of it. The simplest way to describe it is oil and water don't mix, and that's the principles of lithography. But if you have more questions or more interest in the lithography room, which is on the other side of this wall, I will be available to answer any questions if anyone has any about the
I'd like
process
to add
itself.
something.
Oh, please.
If you, let's say you were cooking chicken, and then you went back to the stone and you hadn't cleaned your hands, and you put your fingers, even though they didn't have a litho crayon in it, you put your chicken fingers here, that would print.
Yes.
So you have to be very clean and careful when you work.
Absolutely. Yeah, a pristine stone is a beautiful thing, but it's one of the most luscious things to draw on, but it is a delicate surface that has to be kept
Talk
very
about the
clean.
weight.
Oh, the weight? They're really heavy. We'll leave it at that. A lot of the stones that Ann used, obviously, for something like this, you need a stone that's considerably bigger than the paper. It can be thousands of pounds. There's a few places you can still mine lithostones, but they're sort of evaporating where they are. There's one latitude all the way around the planet where the lithostones, the particular kind of limestone that works with this process, can be found. Where? Well, it goes all around the world. So there's like Germany, Italy. There's a couple places out west. There's some in China. It's somewhere around. If you can sort of imagine where where Germany is, that's about what the latitude is, north of the equator. But it literally circumference of the whole globe. On this one narrow latitude, you can find these stones. Originally, it was a seafloor that was uplifted millions of years ago, compacted, and turned into this very particular kind of limestone. You could ask a geologist to give more detail. Yeah.
Is there more quality? Can you get better quality detail from a stone than you can from a metal plate?
It has a particular quality that the metal plates replicate, but it's different.
It's very different because the reason I don't work on plates is the stone is like a piece of paper. When you draw on it, you can erase, you can draw. Metal plates are very hard to work on because you can't erase them.
Yeah, these are very malleable. You can scratch into them. We can go into more detail after. I have a few examples in the other room that show a little more detail on the kinds of stones and how they've been used. But you had a quick question?
Yeah, where do you buy them? Is there distributors or
a lot of them are used, actually. There's a couple places that sell stones. Some of them are pristine. Some of them are used stones. We were saying there's actually a warehouse in Germany that's like a storage place for all of the lithostones in Europe. And it's like an aircraft hangar filled with stones. There are a couple replacements that have been developed, but they exist everywhere. People just don't know what they are. And as long as they're in good shape and still thick enough, they can be used, hundreds and hundreds of times. So, yeah.
why is the thickness so important?
If it's too thin, it would crack under the pressure.
Which happened to me in 2 editions. It got too thin, and when it goes through the press, the pressure cracked.
Yeah. Limestone is relatively delicate. You can see nicks here. Sometimes you also get these seams in them that you don't know, and as you get thinner and thinner, it becomes a weak point, and then under pressure they just snap. It happens.
So what about limestone that you use in bathrooms or on floors? Now that's a thinner limestone?
It may not be the exact quality that's used for the lithography ones. It's a very particular kind of limestone, geologically, and what's in it, and when it was made, and how dense it is. Not all limestone will work, but I'm sure the tiles are too small.
But they also make lithos on every other kind of substance. Paper and what else?
Plastic. There's the different kinds of metal plates. There's also like a quartz that's being used. It has to do with the chemical composition and the crystalline structure of how it's made. If you look at it under a magnifying glass, it kind of looks like a sponge. And so it's the pores of the stone that allow the water in, the grease to clog. When you actually chemically etch it, it actually transforms chemically into a different surface. So it's a very complicated technical process.
That's why people like Chris are important.
But of course, without the artists, we can't do anything.
That's why it's collaboration, and that's the name of this exhibition, collaboration.
Absolutely.
One can't exist without the others.
Another quick question?
Just a quick question. Once you put an image on the limestone and you want to do another image, can you sand that off?
Yes, you actually grain it off. You
Okay.
actually grind it down and take off the top layer to create a fresh surface.
What would you do that with?
Something called a levigator.
It goes like this.
Or you can also use another stone. What you do is you use like sandpaper that's loose, not on paper. You put it on top and then you grind. You can grind two stones together to grind it off.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Otherwise, like I said, more questions can be had after the talk. We'll turn it over to Ann, and she's going to give all the.
Turn it over to Kim.
Oh, back to Kim.
Thank you.
Welcome them. Tell them about CCP.
Okay, so I have welcomed you already. But to tell you a little bit more about CCP. So we are a 28-year-old nonprofit printmaking organization. We've always been in this location here in Matthews Park. There are, I would estimate, like 5 different major programming areas that we support. One of them is the gallery and the exhibition space. We also have an artist membership program for artists who are printmakers, but maybe don't have their own presses and equipment. So people who are printmaking artists can come as a member and reserve space and use our studios. We also teach workshops, and we have public programs in addition to other educational programs at schools and camps and other ways of getting out into the community to teach people about printmaking. We also have an artist in residence program, which is centered around the Gardener's Cottage, which is in the rear of our facility. And that has its own private studio and presses and an apartment and backyard. It's very nice. And that is an application-based program where it's on a quarterly basis for people to apply. And we have artists come from all over the world for 1 to 2 weeks to come here to Norwalk. To work with our printers or to simply work in the space, but to investigate a printmaking project that they might not otherwise have the opportunity to do so. And then also we will work with artists such as Ann on a printmaking project one-on-one. So in that way, we do have collaborative printmaking happening here. And Chris, who is just here talking, he will, work with artists and help them realize a project. And that is the same sort of association that Ann had with James Reed, who is the printer with Ann on these prints. And so Ann can tell you a lot more about how this project came to be and the work that they did over the course of the 5 years to make the prints that we have on view.
Thank you. I'm going to mostly read because I don't want to forget anything that I've written. First of all, I want to say I know many of you and that you all have busy work, and I greatly appreciate your being here and taking your time. You create art because you have an obsession. Picasso had an obsession. James Reed and I had an obsession. How could you work 5 years on this without having an obsession? So I'm going to speak about several of the prints that are on these walls, and afterwards you can match them up with what I say. But first I'm going to talk a little bit about Picasso. Picasso was born in Spain in 1881 and died in France in 1973. He was 91 years old. His given name at birth, which I found out when I was writing this, bear with me. His given name was Pablo, Diego, Jose, Francisco, de Paula, Juan, Nepomuceno, Crispin, Crispiniano, Maria, Remedios, de la Santisma, Trinidad, Ruiz, Picasso. I'm certain, without having gone further, that that is what wealthy Spanish people did. They used all their relatives' names. No. Ruiz was his father's name, Picasso his mother's. He moved permanently to Paris in 1904, and he became Pablo Picasso. He said in 1935, "It is my misfortune and probably my delight to use things as my passions tell me." And his last words at 91, when he was at a dinner party at a table with artists and people from the south of France, were, "Drink to me, drink to my health," and then he keeled over. And then that became a song from Paul McCartney. So, it's a perfect time for the Center for Contemporary Printmaking that they chose to reopen the show, because there are celebrations worldwide for the 50th anniversary of Picasso, 1973 to 2023. So our exhibition fits right in with many, many worldwide celebrations. The Guggenheim in New York has mounted a small, delicious Picasso show, which reveals much about what he was before he became famous. And there are umpteen articles in journals, newspapers, books, and Googling Picasso would keep you busy for weeks. There's, and that's what I did, and that's why I know that. If you are seriously interested in any artist's work, it's necessary not to confuse feelings about his personal life and his work. One could easily dismiss Picasso because of decades of true and quite negative descriptions of his personality. I mean, it's true, he was a sexist, he was a narcissist, he was cruel to his family and his friends, especially to his family. He refused to acknowledge his children at one point. And you know that he had many mistresses and wives, and he was cruel to all of them. A couple of them committed suicide. But they were his muse. They were all his muse. And he documented them in paintings, prints, ceramics. He used their being. And they stayed with him. One, Francois Gillot, bore him the two children that we all know, Claude and Picasso, and Paloma Picasso. Claude committed suicide, and Paloma is a jeweler and an artist. So he's best known for his paintings, but there has been, in the last decades, more interest in his printmaking. Picasso created his first print in 1899 in Spain, and then he became a printmaker in earnest in France, starting 1904 through his last etching in 1972, the year before he died. He did his last etching series at age 90, and they're incredible. He produced over 2,000 prints in his lifetime, collaborating with different printmakers and using experimental and very different techniques than ever had been done with printmaking. So making prints is a joint effort. That's why our exhibition is titled Collaboration. Over the years, Picasso worked with several different printmakers in Paris and the south of France, including, after World War II, a printer in Paris named Fernand Morlot, mostly in lithography. It was fascinating for James Reed and I to vicariously experience Picasso's aesthetic passions, working to discover and recreate his lithographic techniques. Although he is known for making prints using several different media, Picasso wrote, "I like making lithographs more than any other printmaking process because I can easily amend the image as I work," which is what Chris told you about. And he worked from stones mostly and from plates. He traveled between France and Paris and the south of France. It's not possible to carry stones. So he often went to the south and worked when he couldn't find a stone printmaker there. He worked on plates. He also experimented with etchings and linoleum cuts. These 4 on the wall are linoleum cuts. He invented a method called the reduction method. I'm trying to explain it to you, but it's complicated. I used 4 sheets of linoleum, 4 separate sheets for these. If he wanted to do a color print, I think there's one up here called Cassie in Colors. So when he did a color print, he did not use a different sheet for each color. So the one that Jim and I did has 3 colors. But I tried to figure out how Picasso did his linoleum cuts. I did this with 3 separate sheets of linoleum. Picasso used 1 sheet of linoleum, even if he made 20 colors. He would start backwards. He would take the sheet of linoleum and cut away a piece that would be the last piece, not the first piece. And he then cut away every different piece, but the sheet was printed each time he did 1 cut. If he was making an edition of 50, he would make 1 cut and print 50 pieces of paper just with that cut on it. Then he would do the next one, and he would print on the same paper 50 others, and then et cetera, et cetera. But I tried that, and I'm not Picasso, so I couldn't do it. So I had to be satisfied with working in linoleum prints because I had never done it before our project, using just 1 sheet. Thank you. This portfolio has 10 images. 6 of them are not up here, but I named them all after my granddaughters. Each work in this exhibition is mostly a lithograph. There are many different ways to create a lithograph, which Chris has explained. But I love working on a stone rather than paper or on metal plates because, as we heard, you can manipulate the image more. And Chris also told you that there are stones all around the world at a certain height in certain areas. One year, I was invited at a studio in a mountain above Nice for the summer. And at the end of the summer, my partner picked me up and we drove to Florence. And on the way, we saw a white mountain. And so I said, let's go see what it is. So we drove up, and at the top, it was a place where they were making lithostones. It was a limestone mountain. That was the highlight of that trip. more than Florence. So the work in this exhibition represents years of collaboration with master printer James Reed, now retired. We worked together over 30 years. Besides these prints on view, we created nearly 400 prints in varied media: lithographs, etchings, linoleum cut silk screens, and experimental media, which are part of the total works that you're seeing here. Plus, there wasn't enough room to hang the other 30. So James Reed is an integral part of this exhibition, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about him. We met in 1971. He was the owner and principal printmaker at a place called Milestone Graphics in Norwalk first, and then in Bridgeport. He was an artist himself. He had numerous solo shows. He participated in more than 150 exhibitions. And he was, I think, practically the first printmaker here when it began. Grace Shanley, who started this, yeah, Jim printed here. He studied printmaking, among other places, at Tamarind Institute. Have any of you heard of that? It's in New Mexico, and it's still a renowned printmaking center. Tamarind is credited with revitalizing fine art lithography. James Reed retired a few years ago, donating his entire personal collection of prints to Fairfield University Art Museum. It was such an important, generous act by him that the New York Times wrote an article about it. He turned his studio, when he could no longer work, over to Irene Bednarsik, who moved Milestone Graphics to New Haven. Okay, I made my first print, as many of you probably did, as a kid in elementary school, the ubiquitous potato print. I loved making these, and my mother had to keep a stash of baking potatoes in the house so I could do it after school. I learned to print by doing that. But in high school, which was not equipped with print room, I learned to make prints by transfer method. I don't know if any of you have ever tried this, but you take a newspaper and you find an image, and then you coat the newspaper with turpentine, and then you turn it over onto a piece of blank paper, and you spoon print it, and lo and behold, an image. Now, the artist Robert Rauschenberg used that in the 70s for a lot of his prints. So it's fun. You should try it. So in grad school in the 1960s, I passed a shop on 16th Street in New York. It had a sign in the window that read Gallery 220. I walked in and I was surprised to see that in fact it was a gallery having a show, but behind the gallery in the back in a large room was a print shop. And the owner, Miguel Herrera, was the printer in that print shop. And I walked in and he introduced me to lithography, which I had never done before. And I was hooked. Let me tell you, I was hooked. I collaborated with Miguel as my first collaboration printer. And my first solo exhibition of prints was at the front gallery. And I worked there until I met James Reed in 1971. I had a show, this first show. I just have to tell you this funny story. It was crowded, and there was a man there who looked as if he had burned, his whole face had been burned. And I didn't want to talk to him because it was so awful to see him. And he came over and talked to me, and he wanted to talk, and I just couldn't stand looking at him. And then he ripped off his face, and it was my son from California. It was David. So now to start about this work. In the 1980s, James Reed and I were studying an original Picasso called White Bust on Black, and it's written about as you enter, which a cousin had brought over to us for framing information. Reed and I wondered how Picasso had gotten the very silken texture of the black and white. Now, we had been making prints for years with using black and white, and we never got the silken texture that we saw in that Picasso. And it was a simple black and white print, as you'll see if you look at the front piece. We never could realize the luminosity and intensity that was on the surface of this lithograph. We had been working for many years on my own work. We decided to take a break and try emulating the surface of this print by making another print using my images, but trying to achieve Picasso's luminosity in that print. We searched books and catalogs for information about his work. We found very little to help us, so at one point we contacted a man named Eric Morleau, who was the grandson of Picasso's printer in Paris, Fernand Morleau. And Eric runs a gallery in New York on 79th Street where he shows Picasso's work. So we asked him for help, and we wrote that we were unable to find much information about how Picasso made his surfaces, and he wrote back corroborating the lack of information of the making of Picasso's lithographs. And a letter from him is right on the wall as you walk in. And that just said, that's it, we have to do this. Because if Eric Morleau said his grandfather never wrote about it and Picasso didn't, we're going to do it. And that was like in mid-1980s. So we had to find materials that were existing in Jim's studio that we could get the effects of the luminosity from Picasso's print. We worked for weeks. It was only after the first successful one, which we felt was successful, called Paper Doll, that's my name, using his black and white print that I've just told you about, that we had a success. And we were just thrilled. But that was one print, and I had other things to do on my plate, But I said, let's try another. And that went on for 5 years. And we made 53 prints emulating Picasso's prints. In between, I was doing my own work also. And James had many other artists working with them, so it was an extremely busy time. But I was younger then, and I could do it. The project just grew like Topsy. We said at the beginning, let's just try this. So after the few were successful, we had a goal. We were aiming to complete 50, which we did 53 over 5 years. Each print represented an exciting challenge. Besides having incomplete information about how Picasso did it, we learned that many of the materials that he used could not be found because they were toxic and they were not in stores anymore. You couldn't buy some of the materials that he used because you poisoned yourself. So I have no idea how he lived till 91. I had a friend in Paris, an artist friend, who when we needed a material would go around to the art stores, their art supply stores, and she couldn't find them either. So it wasn't just here, it was that they didn't make them anymore because of toxicity. We had to find substitutes, which Reed did. I remember working on a lithograph, which I think is up somewhere here, Paloma and Claudia. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if everybody could see it. Okay. Picasso's lithograph was titled Paloma and Claude. These were his two children from Francois Gillot. But we were just transfixed by the way it looked like a watercolor or something that had a different look than we'd done. So we tried to replicate it. Later we found out he did it by finger painting. But when we did it, we had to find another way. So we looked for a substance that maybe you used to have here. It was a liquid that would erase, and it's no longer made. It's this white liquid in a bottle. I don't know why they pulled it from the supplies, of lithography supplies, but it probably had some toxicity to it. When I erase, I use a razor blade, very carefully. And that's how we made ours. But we found out that later that Picasso did it by finger painting, and that would have been fun. Okay, thank you. So Jim had to make a liquid eraser that we couldn't find in the store. So before anything happened with this print, he said, give me 3 weeks. Don't call me for 3 weeks. And then at the end of 3 weeks, he called me and he said, come to the studio. And I went, and he was standing over a Bunsen burner with a white enamel pot, like from the 1930s. And he said, oh, don't breathe it. And he said, just dip this brush in it and swipe it across the stone, which I did, and it was perfectly erased. So I said, Jim, you should bottle that and become rich. No, that wasn't Jim's way. No. So, but he was a magician who could create materials as well as be a collaborator. Well, sometimes I started working on a stone, and I needed Jim's alchemy to find out how to do it. Can you imagine working every couple of days a week for 30 years with a person that you weren't living with and you had to work with? I could write a story about all the problems, but he could read my mind eventually. And he could read my mind, and if I weren't in the studio, he could do what I could do. In fact, before he retired, he said to me, if there are any unsigned prints, I could sign your name in them. Picasso sometimes worked in series. He changed each image as he worked. So Reed and I did several series, one titled Down by the Bay, which is on the walls in the other studio. It's called, I don't know if there's a name for it, but I did 7 or 8 process.
The process groups.
Yeah. Okay. And that's what Picasso did with occasionally the image of a bull or the image of a woman. You'll see it if you go in there in the adjacent gallery. So printmaking is a serious art, serious as painting, serious as drawing. It has to be a passion because painting, you can sell one painting and make more money than if you sold 10 editions of prints. So it has to be a passion because you don't think of the money, you just think of the work. It's a labor of love, and it always has been for me. I'm still making prints. Right now I'm working on a series of 10 prints with lithographs on stone, which Chris will do one of, illustrating a friend's book. So I'm doing 10 lithographs. She's writing about the subject that I love most for the subject matter in my work, which is noir, which Susan Granger has written about. So, I'm lucky enough to be also working on a catalog raisonné, which means a full catalog of prints. Every one that I've done is created in a book, which Miggs Burroughs is working on. He's going to be the creator of this book. And I'm sure he's sorry now he agrees. I just don't believe in angst when working. Even if problems arise, I believe that artists have the greatest happiness in their work. I don't go for artists who just complain all the time. I am happy when I do my work. I don't even have an artist block. I've never had an artist block because there's always something to do. Sometimes I start working in the morning and don't know that it's become dark. And that's how much I love the work. So being famous is not a given part of being an artist unless you're Picasso. So even if you've spent your entire life making art, only a minute percentage of fine artists become famous. And you can't go for that. You just have to work. You have to love the work. And if, even if you change with the styles, you're not going to get anywhere. You have to stick with what you know. And you have to, I'm saying this because it's true, you have to be happy when you work. It's important. So most artists have to supplement their income as artists to help me support my painting and my printmaking. I taught art for 26 years at Norwalk Community College. And working with hundreds of students often informed my work. I mean, it wasn't anything like I would go and not like being there and want to get home. I mean, you live by students and you learn by students. I'm sure you know that, Emily. So James Reed retired, and he's turned his studio over, as I said, to Irene Bednarczyk, which is now in New Haven. And so now I'm going to be working here because it's closer and working with Chris. You create art because you have this obsession. Picasso had this obsession. James Reed had this obsession. I had this obsession. Thank you. Tell them that they can follow Chris if they want to go to work.
I will. So Chris is going to be next door in the lithography studio gallery, where he can give you much more hands-on and visible information about lithography. It's also the gallery and studio where we have the down by the day print as well as the process prints to accompany it. I think there are more than 7. We have a number of them on the wall, but also as far as process prints go, there are even prints on the reverse sides of them. We had to pick which side to show. They're on loan from Fairfield University's Art Museum, where James Reed had given his collection. So we're very fortunate to be able to share those here. But in particular with this exhibition being so focused on lithography as a technique and a process and the investigative work that you and James had done, it was important to be able to show some of those different states and part of the process to make a print like that. So it's a different piece of the exhibition, but it's on view in the other room. So,
Thank you all.
Thank you.